Dear Patriots, before the news starts, please subscribe to our patriotic channel by clicking the subscribe button. Give us a thumbs up to this video. Don't forget to leave your opinion below in the comments section. Share the news on Facebook and Twitter so you friends see it. Thank you.
Conservative Watchdog just put some much-needed heat on George Soros and his Open Society Foundation. Thank you, Judicial Watch. The Conservative Watchdog just sued for documents on activities of George Soros Open Society Foundation. It's about time. It is time for Americans to be allowed to see State Department documentation regarding the public funding of Soros Open Society Foundations, said Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton. The billionaire George Soros needs zero assistance from taxpayers to promote his far-left agenda abroad. Judicial Watch now has 4 FOIA lawsuits relating to the Obama administration's funding for Soros Open Society Foundation's operations. Judicial Watch reports. Judicial Watch announced today that it filed Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, lawsuits against the U.S. Department of State and the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, for records relating to their funding of the political activities of the Soros Open Society Foundations of Romania. Judicial Watch v. U.S. State Department and the U.S. Agency for International Development, No. 1:18 CV00667, and the Soros Open Society Foundations of Colombia. Judicial Watch v. U.S. Department of State, No. 1:18 CV00668. The Soros Open Society Foundations of Romania lawsuit was filed after state and USAID failed to substantively respond to an October 16, 2017, FOIA request seeking among other records. All records relating to any contracts, grants or other allocations, disbursements of funds by the State Department to the Open Society Foundation, Romania and or its personnel and or any OSFR subsidiary or affiliate. All assessments, evaluations, reports or similar records relating to the work of Open Society Foundation, Romania and or its subsidiaries or affiliated organizations. The Soros Open Society Foundations of Colombia lawsuit was filed after state failed to respond to an October 23, 2017, FOIA request seeking among other records. All records regarding any contracts, grants or other allocations, disbursements of funds by the State Department to the Open Society Foundation, Colombia and or any OSF subsidiaries, affiliates, and or OSF personnel operating in Colombia, as well as the following entities: Fundación Ideas para la Paz, La Chilavacia, de Justicia, Corporación Nuevo Arco Iris, Paz y Reconciliación, Global Drug Policy Program, and news portal Las Dos Orillas. All records of communication, whether by emails, text messages, or instant chats, between any officials, employees or representatives of the State Department in Colombia, including Ambassador Kevin Whitaker and any officials, employees or representatives of the Open Society Foundation, its subsidiaries, affiliates, and or those entities identified in the first bullet. As in other parts of the world, a number of Soros-funded entities and projects in Romania are also funded by the United States government. The Romanian Center for Independent Journalism, which is supported by the Open Society Institute in New York, recently received $17,000 from the State Department. In February 2017, Laura Silber of Open Society Foundations reportedly condemned liberal governments in the Balkans, such as Macedonia, Albania, and Romania, for working against the Soros NGOs. In Romania, in March 2017, the leader of the governing party reportedly charged that the Soros foundations that he has funded since 1990 have financed evil. Soros NGOs in Colombia are reportedly receiving millions from USAID. Verdad Abierta, a web-based portal created by Teresa Ronderos, director of the Open Society Program on Independent Journalism, boasts on its website that it receives support from USAID. Abierta has helped rewrite Colombia's history, elevating terrorists to the same level as the legitimate police and military forces, and rebranding decades of massacres, kidnappings, child soldiering, and drug trafficking by a criminal syndicate as simply 50 years of armed conflict. Foundation Ideas para la Paz, once led by peace negotiator Sergio Jaramillo, now a member of the Oversight Junta, is funded by the Open Society Foundations and has received more than $200,000 in U.S. tax dollars. The left-wing news portal La Chilavacia, another Open Society initiative, also boasts of being a USAID grantee. Its columnist, Rodrigo Uprumni, whose NGO La Justicia also partners with USAID and Open Society, is considered one of the architects of the peace deal. Former National Liberation Army terrorist Leon Valencia, Open Society collaborator and grantee, has received at least $1 million in USAID funding through his NGOs Corporación Nuevo Arco Iris and Paz y Reconciliación, and left-wing news portal Las Realidades, which he co-founded. In 2016, Soros Open Society Foundations gave more than $3.3 million to organizations operating in Colombia. Several of those organizations have also been financially supported by the United States government, having received more than $5 million from the Department of State, USAID, and the Inter-American Foundation, a federal agency, in recent years. One of the Soros-funded entities, an LGBT advocacy organization, was also selected by the Inter-American Foundation as a partner organization in its Colombia Peace Project initiative. It is time for Americans to be allowed to see State Department documentation regarding the public funding of Soros Open Society Foundations, said Judicial Watch President Tom Fitton. The billionaire George Soros needs zero assistance from taxpayers to promote his far-left agenda abroad. Judicial Watch now has 4 FOIA lawsuits relating to the Obama administration's funding for Soros operations. HT Judicial Watch. Breaking Parkland student anti-gun activist just made horrifying admission, "It all makes sense now." For the last several weeks, we have witnessed the Parkland shooting survivors taking to the streets and the mainstream media to lecture Americans on the need for more gun control. Of course, thousands of people have fallen for these manipulative tactics as these fresh-faced children plead to the nation to give up their guns in the name of safety. While many people have seen through the lies of the left, there are those who are still held captivated by these heartfelt speeches made by teenage activists to strip Americans of their God-given rights. For over a month, we have seen the smug faces of gun control student activists, and survivors of the horrific shooting, David Hogg, and Emma Gonzalez plastered all over the media blaming guns and demanding that politicians enforce stricter laws to stop future school shootings. Now, for many Americans, that very notion seems absurd, but that has not stopped liberal politicians from trying to enact more gun control legislation based on the emotions of teenage activists. Now, one of those anti-gun activists by the name of Emma Gonzalez has made a shocking admission concerning the Parkland shooting that blows their entire gun control narrative apart, and it could not have come at a better time. The left knows that the majority of Americans would never give up their right to bear arms willingly, but they do know that if there are enough tragedies, some people may bend on the issue. As you know, over the last several years, there seems to be an increase in school shootings, and the left, who never lets a crisis go to waste, has used these horrifying events to push more gun control onto the masses. However, on the surface, it may seem to the untrained eye that guns are the common denominator in these tragedies, but there is another glaring detail being overlooked. The majority of these school shooters all happen to have been victims of incessant school bullying. Now, in no way does someone getting bullied justify their actions in murdering their classmates, but it certainly does give a glimpse into the mindset of a troubled individual. However, this past weekend, when thousands of teenagers swarmed the city streets of Washington, D.C. demanding more gun control, did they address that as a possible remedy to the gun violence epidemic? No, they didn't. In fact, they did the exact opposite. Well, at least Emma Gonzalez did, when she stated that not only did she and her classmates bully Nicolas Cruz in the past, but they were justified in doing so. Here is more from Louder with Grouter. Just because a student is bullied doesn't mean that student is justified in shooting up a school. Emma admitting she bullied the shooter is a tantamount admission the shooter, not the gun, is responsible for the shooting. Yet Emma participated in a march against guns, suggesting it's the guns that are the problem, not the individual who pulled the trigger. Typically school shooters are young men, ostracized and bullied by their peers. Perhaps Emma and her peers who ostracized the Parkland shooter since middle school should have a march against bullying. Emma suggests no one was surprised the Parkland shooter turned out to be the shooter. She's not alone, as it was also recommended by Scott Peterson, and others, the shooter be involuntarily committed. Had the shooter been committed, it's unlikely he'd have been able to purchase a gun for the shooting. Those are the obvious points. Unfortunately, we're living in stupid times, where obvious points aren't obvious. Blaming a gun for someone's actions is like Emma blaming her mechanical pencil for misusing the word literally in a school paper. Yet 200,000 or so dumbasses marched against the right to own guns. Which millions of law-abiding Americans, including myself, need for personal protection. Not to put too fine a point on it. The Parkland shooting had less to do with guns and more to do with governmental failure and, now according to Emma, the continued bullying of an unstable young man. Again, bullying doesn't excuse or justify shooting up a school. Okay? Okay. But I think less bullying of students is certainly better than we bullied him and he deserved it. Fair? People are responsible for their actions. The tools are not. While these kids have lived through a horror, no one should ever have to face they are missing who is to blame. Nicolas Cruz is the person who walked into the school and murdered people with a gun, but that does not mean banning guns would have stopped him from doing so. The problem is not the weapon, but the matter of the heart, and until that is addressed these crimes will only continue, and no matter how many laws are on the books will stop that.